So I thought I'd do a short video about how you find Longfellow's poetry. I've been doing this series of Longfellow intros, telling you about Longfellow and his heroines in particular. This is in part to promote my new book, which is The Heroines of Henry Longfellow, but also as an educator, as a poet myself who's very influenced by Longfellow, I want people to read this amazing poet. But one of the tough things about getting into Longfellow's poetry is his books of his poetry are not as ubiquitous as books of, say, T.S. Eliot's poetry or Robert Frost's poetry, or even Emily Dickinson's or Walt Whitman's poetry, people who were his contemporaries. And so I wanted to just give some recommendations for places to begin. I think probably the easiest place to begin when it comes to getting a sense for the breadth of his work is this Penguin selected poems of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Lawrence Buell, who's a fantastic Longfellow scholar, edited this back in the 80s, I believe it was, in 1988. And this includes a lot of Longfellow's most popular poems. It starts with Evangeline, which I've been talking up in other videos, The Courtship of Miles Standish, which we'll talk about soon, some of his plays like the New England Tragedies. And then it has selections from his many dozens of poetry collections like Psalm of Life, The Warning, The Day is Done, one of my favorite short poems of his. One of the problems with this, though, is you don't get a feel for whole collections of short poems by him. It just has a couple poems from many of his collections. This is really a good one to get if you want to read Evangeline for the first time, or if you want to read some of his plays. This is a good volume to pick up. But if you want to get a feel for what he was like as a poet who made these collections of short poems where he would put dozens and dozens of short poems in a row and kind of create this sort of thematic and emotional arc from the beginning of a poetry collection to the end, you really need to find a type of Longfellow collection that is sadly out of print, but often you can pick up in used bookstores. I have a beautiful version of it here. This is an Oxford University Press version of Longfellow's poem from, I believe, around the turn of the century. Yeah, it's 1912. And you have this beautiful front piece, this picture of Longfellow. The pages, of course, are a little yellowed. But what you're looking for is a collection that has all of the poems that he published in the order he published them in. So if you can read that, you have Voices of the Night, which is his first collection. There are many of these, what we would call collected poems of Longfellow. They start with Voices of the Night, go on to his ballads, the Spanish Student, which we talked about in a previous video, is in here. It's basically all of Longfellow's original poetry and some of his translations published in chronological order. This is an invaluable type of book. Now you can see that the spine is separating on this one, so often you'll find these falling apart. Some of these even have beautiful illustrations. I don't believe that this one does. So if you can find something like this as a used bookstore or go online, this is really the best type of Longfellow book to buy to really get a sense of the breadth of his work. And you can dip into any part of this, whether it's a play, whether it's his book of sonnets, which has dozens of just lovely sonnets he wrote late in his career. So I recommend sort of if you want an easy Amazon buy, just to get started, this is good. But this is the real treasure trove that you want to look for. The other way, if you want to spend very little money, Dover Thrift Editions has both a version of Evangeline, which has all of Evangeline, and then just a couple other selected poems. And then they have a companion that's called The Favorite Poems. And this has The Courtship of Miles Standish, another one of his long narrative poems in it, and then a collection of like Psalm of Life, Village Blacksmith, some of the more classics. So I believe these cost like $2 or $3 each if you really want to save money and kind of hit some of the greatest hits. Where do you learn about Longfellow's life? Where do you learn about the background? Well, we had a great era just after the turn of the millennia of publishing about Longfellow's biography. What kind of man he was, that really investigated his life in a lot more depth than had been done in many years. The single volume I'd recommend perhaps most is Charles Calhoun's. Longfellow Rediscovered Life. This is young Longfellow. This is Longfellow, in his smoldery romantic days, before he became the Longfellow that we saw in the other book, where he grew that beard. We'll talk about why he grew a beard in a future video. So Longfellow Rediscovered Life by Charles C. Calhoun. This is a great book. Calhoun is a really great storyteller about Longfellow's life, and kind of digs into a lot of the kind of contemporary interest of Longfellow's poems, kind of connects it to kind of the questions that we as Americans, both politically and historically, are interested in the 21st century. He connects that to Longfellow's life. Probably the greatest living Longfellow scholar writing in English right now is Christoph Irmscher. He has a few books on Longfellow. This one is a great companion piece to Calhoun. This is called Public Poet, Private Man, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow at 200. It's kind of written for the 2007 200th anniversary of his birth. He was born in 1807. And this just has a lot of lovely full-color images, like of pictures that Longfellow drew for his kids, or images of Longfellow's family, Longfellow's house. And Irmscher really digs into these corners of Longfellow's life that you don't usually get in just a conventional, here's what his writing career was. You get to learn about lots of nooks and crannies of his life that are fascinating. His involvement in abolition, this book goes into in great detail, probably more than any other book before it, and has kind of spurred an interest in Longfellow as an abolitionist. So I would say, starting with Calhoun and Irmscher, if you want to read about, from a contemporary viewpoint, what kind of guy he was, what his life was like. But the gold standard is finding one of these old collected poems and just making it your friend. Get to know it, flip through it. This is what got me into Longfellow, having a collection of all of Longfellow's poetry that I could just sit with and really get to know his poetry and his vision of life. So I hope that's helped you kind of see how to get started in getting to know Longfellow. There are a couple other publishers out there that do a selected poems. I think Signet Classics has a pretty affordable one. Actually, Christoph Irmscher has an introduction to Longfellow in that one. If you want to spend a little more on a hardback, newer version of a selected Longfellow, the Library of America Press also has one of those, but I think probably starting with Dover or Penguin is just going to be as well if you want to just dip your toe in. Well, thanks. I hope that you are enjoying these videos about Longfellow and learning why he's important, why I love him so much, and how you can benefit from both his vision of humanity and his lovely poetry.